So Ernest Hemingway is a very famous writer, and quite a lot has been written on him. And in fact, people think that uh, almost everything has been written on him. So in India, people are no more interested in Hemingway's works. But there is plenty of things to be explored with reference to the peculiar psychological problem in the public writer. And it is related, people often equate T.H. Lawrence with Oedipus complex. But Hemingway was stuck up also in Oedipus complex because his mother, Grace Hemingway, was extremely assertive, dominating, and it affected the growing years of a guy who read in a school in Oak Park, and his father was totally dominated. His father was totally dominated by his mother, Grace Hemingway. Am I visible? Okay. So here was a man who was troubled by his mother, who was extremely dominating, just like the mother of D.H. Lawrence. So the two novelists are often compared. And people think that Hemingway was anti-feminist. But today I will speak of his career with reference to Freud's libido, and will try to explain what really happened with the guy. Why was he so uncomfortable with every woman? So was he against all women? I think it is not true. And he was not actually an anti-feminist. So first he married Hadley Hemingway and he went to Paris in 1921. Like many Hemingway critics, I believe that if ever Hemingway loved any woman, it was his first wife, Hadley Hemingway, and with whom he went to Paris. And his last memoir, A Movable Feast, which came out in 1961 after his suicide, it speaks of the Paris years when they had a lovely time. So, but he could not go with Hadley quite long, and there was a breakup. Then he married Pauline after writing the Farewell to Arms. The affair was already going. Although Hemingway was always one at a time, but when Pauline came, Hadley was out. And then it was very difficult to live with Hemingway. Why? What was the psychological crisis? This is what I would like to investigate, because Faulkner once said, why did Hemingway have to marry? If you divorce so often, why did he have to marry then? He could have lived together. The point is, Hemingway was very religious, God-fearing, not spiritual, but he was God-fearing, very religious, and he thought marriage was a sanctified, a sacred act. So everything led to marriage. So after Pauline, uh, it was Martha. So in 1936, a neglected novel of Hemingway came out. It is entitled To Have and Have Not. It is a neglected novel because it was written at a time when the sociological condition of America was not good and people did not care to see what Hemingway was trying to write through his novels. There is a passage in the novel where a couple quarrels just before the divorce, and the girl, the man is a writer, and the girl is disgusted with the writer, and she speaks fluently on the limitations and on his incapacities of love, his selfishness. The man is upset, but the argument is so strong, the argument that comes from the woman who is going to leave him in favor of another person who is not otherwise a very sophisticated person, but she believes she is more sincere. Now she gives out eloquently through 2-3 pages, and he says, "You writer, you hypocrite, you change your politics." And so I think this is something like a self-criticism of himself, as if Hemingway was criticizing himself through these accusations of this departing wife. So that is extremely interesting, but the book is neglected. The book came out in 1936. It is called To Have and Have Not. So this indicates, and there are other places where it is clear that Hemingway sees the point of view of the woman very clearly in his novels. Although in personal life he was very selfish, self-centered. He was a very difficult man to live with. It was very difficult to live with, and he had a nasty temper. It was growing as he was aging more and more. It was growing more. And Freud speaks of, in 1905, Freud's 3 essays on the theory of sexuality came out. Now, Freud focused entirely on libido as something which belongs to the lower zone, and it is all negative. Now, 6 years later, Jung came out with a deconstruction that no, libido is not a negative force. It is constructive, it is creative, it gives out all art, everything. And in 1922, Freud revised 3 essays on the theory of sexuality. There also Freud did not change his opinion. He stuck to his old opinion that libido is a negative force. But there was one addition to this 1902 edition of 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, where Freud used a compound word called ego sense. So somehow he could understand that this libido has a close link with ego. Now he could not characterize what it is, as Sri Aurobindo did in his letters on yoga, in the Life Divine, in the Synthesis of Yoga, and his other major works, that this libido is located in between the heart and the sex center. Freud could not give the map of the libido. The libido is neither in the physical, neither in the sex center, not in the heart center. Sri Aurobindo places it exactly between the heart and the sex center. So somehow Freud came very near when he used the word ego sense. And it is this ego sense which is related to Hemingway's sexual drives. And recently, somebody called Professor Tanya has written that after his 45th year, Hemingway was becoming important, and his proverbial sexuality was in doubt. But I doubt, because I have read a key book on Hemingway which came out in 1982. It is entitled By Force of Will, and it was written by Scott Donaldson. Donaldson says, he gives us an important information about Hemingway's life. He says Hemingway was feeling the pressure of sex so much that he was taking sex sedating pills. So today, most of the Bollywood heroes are taking sex enhancing pills. But Hemingway was taking sex sedating pills. He had to sedate because he was religious. He knew he shouldn't do this. But somehow it was an abnormal energy, vital energy in Ernest Hemingway. I think Professor Tanya is wrong here in believing that he was losing his power, because even beyond the 50s, he had a tremendous libido. And as Donaldson has suggested, that he was taking 6 sedating pills even at age 52. And the leading Bollywood heroes are taking sex enhancing pills from their late 30s. So this was the man with whom the wives had to cope with. Along with it, there was that mighty ego, as Freud rightly relates this, that this libido has a faint connection, which Sri Aurobindo later explains in detail. A faint connection, but it's a strong connection between money ego sex, power ego sex. These are the trinities Sri Aurobindo uses in the letters. So, in the early 1940s, Martha was his third wife. She got an assignment to write war stories, and Hemingway was so jealous of his wife that he offered himself to be the correspondent. Now he can't do that. I can't think of it. My wife trying at something, a little of the psychic, those who have the little of the psychic in them, they can't think of it. Suvam is here. Naturally, he can't think of it, that if his wife is getting an assignment and I will intervene, I am so jealous of my wife. So what is love? Where is love in Hemingway? And this comes from that psychological disorder which he inherited from his childhood, because his mother was so dominating and his father suffered. So he started disliking, hating girls and becoming jealous of girls. And so all his marriages were unsuccessful. Imagine Martha Gellhorn. Martha Gellhorn died only a few years back. Martha got a war correspondent assignment, and Hemingway offered himself to be, and Martha didn't get the job because Hemingway was too famous. Martha didn't get the job. We can't think of it, that I am abstracting my wife. Many of us can't think of it because we have a little of the psychic in us. So it is very strange that it is related with that ego and libido connection. And this is located, the psychological center is located between the heart and the sex center, and it is related to man's egoistic drives, etc. So divorce, every time Hemingway divorced, he said, she left me. This was his trick. Otherwise, Hemingway was, in writing, he was wonderful, excellent as a human being, as a person. There was a proverb in Paris in the 1920s, when he was young even, that if you do him any favor, you are gone. Such was his reputation as a person. So, how could one live with such a self-centered man? But strangely enough, throughout his life, whenever he was in trouble, he wrote back to Hadley Hemingway, his first wife. Again and again in trouble, he was seeking shelter with Hadley Hemingway, asking for suggestions, asking for advices. Now, this gives me that feeling that Hemingway was missing his mother and Hadley was something like his mother. And for your information, Hadley was 8 years older than Ernest. So all the time he was in trouble, he was as if taking shelter to Hadley Hemingway, writing to her all the time. Now, this was the psychological crisis in Hemingway, and the remorse was always there. Where do you get the remorse? In writing. Because in life, it is those who lived with him. Mary Hemingway stuck to him till his last. Maybe because of his vast property, or maybe because she was extremely tolerant, maybe she was in love. Sometimes Hemingway would give the food, Mary's food, to the dog. Imagine how he treated his wives. But each time he was in trouble, he was returning to those days of Paris of the early 1920s. When he went to Paris, met with the painters, with his first wife, and in a movable feast, imagine Hemingway feeding his first child milk. It is something, I have seen the photograph. Around 1947, Hemingway was involved with a girl who was 17, and he was immaculately beautiful. You can't imagine. If you see the photograph of Adriana Ivancic, you will wonder. She is the combination of Waida Rahman and Sara Banu. She is just wonderful. You can see in net. And Adriana committed suicide because she could not adjust with anybody, and he committed suicide in 1983 because it was chasing his affair with Hemingway. In Across the River and Into the Trees, the novel which flopped, the heroine was Adriana Ivancic. And what happened exactly, researchers are still trying to find out whether they lived together, whether it was soul to soul. But, and he did the first cover of The Old Man and the Sea. He painted the first cover, designed the first cover of The Old Man and the Sea. So, and it was he was with Mary then. And Mary was tolerant. Now, I suspect because in Hemingway's stories, till his death, till Old Man and the Sea, because after that it was all posthumous novels which came out after 1961. One came out in 1986, the other came out in 200, True at First Light 200, Garden of Eden in 1986, 1961 A Movable Feast, and in 1962 Island in the Stream. Now, it is strange that in his till at least 1950 there is no sign of perversion in Hemingway's love. He made love, and he often speaks of making love and his head becoming cool after making love. That is the typical Hemingway style. Eating and eating well in restaurants, good wine, and his head becomes cool after he makes love. But in his posthumous novel Island in the Stream, I see a trace of Hemingway's perversion, because the narrator hero is with 3 Chinese comfort women. This is something which is unavailable in any of the previous novels. So what I suspect, also as a contradiction to Professor Tania's argument that he lost his sex power after 1940s, no, because even in Island in the Stream, which was written later and came out in 1962 after his death, there are 3 Chinese girls who came to comfort the narrator hero. Now these things indicate that he was slowly moving towards perversion towards the close of his life, not one at a time as he used to be in the past. So for all these, I think the chief psychological problem was Oedipus complex, which is adequately explained by Freud in quite a few of his essays. That and also it was used in Lawrence's Sons and Lovers, and he was suffering from that. He could not find a right girl. Plus, apart from that, apart from his emotional problem, apart from his gap in finding a mother image, which he found in Hadley Hemingway, his first wife, he had an abnormal sex energy, which is like Tiger Woods, I must say. Hemingway was like Tiger Woods. There is one difference. Subham Pal is here. He can tell me better because he is a sports journalist also. In Tiger there is no remorse. But in Hemingway we will find again and again in his letters, in his memoirs, in his non-fiction, within the structure of his novels, he is suffering from remorse. And I suspect it was his abnormal sex energy first, and then he was missing a mother image. I think that's all for today, and this is the psychological crisis and the problem with him. If there is any question, I will answer. If you have any question, I will answer. What exactly happened in him? Because I used two planes of psychology, Freudian and Aurobiндonian, because Freud could not clarify exactly what is libido. He could not map even the libido. For that we had to wait for Aurobindo. So if you have any question, I will clarify this. Because so many things have been written on Hemingway, people will say, why Hemingway again? So I thought, let me speak it out a bit, so I will know that there are plenty of things still to be written on Hemingway about his. There is a good book by Bernice Kurt entitled The Hemingway Women, which is very good. Bernice Kurt, Bernicekert, The Hemingway Women. It's the best book on Hemingway's women. So, any question? Can you speak to me or can you write to me? If you have any question. If you don't have, no problem. Well, urge is definitely, it comes from the gross physical and vital nature, and love comes from the psychic being, and something, at least a drop of the psychic being is there in Hemingway's love for Hadley Hemingway. So urge is always vital. Urge comes from the lower vital planes. Urge cannot be psychic. Urge cannot be love. The central thesis is the psychological problems of Hemingway in dealing with his love life, his married life, because he could not adjust. He could not adjust with his companions, his wives, and I suspect it was for two reasons. One is Oedipus complex. He was not able to adjust with them because the mother fixation is there, and the second is that abnormal sex urge. Abnormal is the right word, because I equated him with Tiger Woods. Tiger had to go to a clinic, and Hemingway was taking sex sedating pills. There is not much of difference, because in the 1950s it was psychology was not so advanced and treatment was not so advanced. Then Hemingway would have gone to the clinic to treat himself. So Sudeep, this is the central thesis. I can see the comments. I have answered Sudeep Ghose's question. And Bodhisattva Khan's questions. Urge is from the vital and love is from the psychic. Definitely, Rajaraj Mukhopadhyay, there was a sin consciousness in Ernest Hemingway, because he mistreated at least 4 women, at least, because we know about the wives, he married them. So he was definitely suffering. Plath was tortured. Sylvia Plath was tortured, but Hemingway tortured others. That way I said that Hemingway is better than Tiger Woods. Hemingway was better than Tiger Woods because Tiger Woods never admitted his mistakes. Tiger Woods never admitted his mistakes to his wife. They are living like friends now. But never he admitted him, but Hemingway admitted through his writings, his memoirs, his letters. And as Raj has asked the question, it's like Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath was extremely tortured. He did things to women as men treated Sylvia Plath. His husband treated Sylvia Plath like this, even worse. So Sylvia had to commit suicide. And Hemingway was extremely sin conscious because he was religious, he was not spiritual, he was very God-fearing. And he thought he was depressed, and in depression he killed himself. Thank you that you came to listen. Yes, Wolf was mistreated. Wolf was mistreated, and she spoke of all the mistreatments as a separate, an individual soul. You can't dominate, you can't subdue an individual soul. So Wolf was a liberator in that sense. And Hemingway knew that he was doing wrong, but he could not do it because of his psychological problems with his wife, mother fixation, and his abnormal sex urge. It did not affect Tapas, it did not affect actually, because in writing he was extremely fluent and inspired all the time. It did not affect at all, except for the fact that he lost his health very quickly. Within his 45th year, he was having diabetes and various ailments. So Tapas, he was physically, he was not well because of his abnormal life, hard drinking, and this kind of life. And if you lead this kind of life, there is always a pressure on you. But when he wrote, he was very cool, and writing was the all in his life. He used women for his writing. He sucked the energy of the women to write well. That was another fault that I missed to mention, that he sucked the energy of women to write well. Thank you. Closing.